Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my Week 2 preseason winners for fantasy football in 2021. Inside today's video, I'm going to be discussing a couple of players that, based upon their Week number 2 preseason performance, that I believe to be big winners. But before we get on into the breakdown of these players, I would like to ask, if you are new to the YouTube channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, me and the guys on the Awesemo Fantasy Football YouTube channel put out content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 Fantasy Football Championship. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure to hit that like button down below. It really helps us out a ton, as well as I would appreciate if you guys could follow me on Twitter at NotoriousFNTSY. So without further ado, let's get into the video. The first winner is a running back that a lot of people were starting to run away from. A lot of people were starting to get very nervous about this player, and that is running back of the Miami Dolphins, Myles Gaskin. Now, last week, in my Week 1 overreactions video, I talked about this situation. I told you guys that, sure, maybe that will make me slightly more nervous what was happening with Malcolm Brown's involvement with how good Salvon Ahmed looked. But my belief was still that Myles Gaskin was going to be the lead back in this offense. I said maybe it would take a week of preseason, maybe a week of the regular season, but eventually Brian Flores is not a fucking idiot. So he was going to realize that Myles Gaskin was by far and away the better running back on the team and give him the touches that he deserves. We saw in preseason, week number 2, this come to fruition. Myles Gaskin and Tua were a combination like peanut butter and jelly. Myles Gaskin had 6 carries for 27 yards and a touchdown. He also went 4 for 4 like he was at Wendy's for 44 receiving yards and 1 receiving touchdown. 2 total touchdowns on the day, over 60 all-purpose yards for Myles Gaskin. And that was just at the very beginning of the game. Had he have played the full game, this guy would have been an absolute monster. I still am going to stand very strong on my argument that Myles Gaskin will be the guy. I think that Malcolm Brown will, at points in the season, vulture touchdowns. I understand that Salvon Ahmed is going to be used somewhat in this offense, but if you're looking for the lead back in Miami on a team that looked very, very good up against the Atlanta Falcons, now again, it's just a preseason game. They're going up against the Atlanta Falcons defense. What do you really expect? But I personally expect this to be a very good team in 2021 offensively that is going to be able to run the ball late in games, especially if the defense stays very strong when they're up in these games. Myles Gaskin is going to be seeing a whole bunch of usage in the rushing game later on in the game. He is also a very solid receiving running back, so please don't overreact to preseason. That is going to be the biggest part of this video. Do not overreact. Everyone went one way last week, week number 1, saying that Myles Gaskin was going to be a bust in fantasy football, and week 2, everyone has eaten the crow. So don't overreact to just one preseason game. I wouldn't even say to overreact to 2 preseason games, but my belief all offseason, my belief right now continues to be that Myles Gaskin is absolutely that guy, pal, in Miami. The next players I want to be talking about here that are winners are Mac Jones and Cam Newton, because they both looked very, very good in preseason action this weekend. Cam, though, should probably end up being the starter of the team, but with Mac Jones and Cam Newton both looking very good, I have a lot of confidence in the New England Patriots now, because even if Cam Newton starts to kind of have a season like last year, right? If you guys remember, Cam Newton was on fire for the first couple of weeks of the season, and then eventually all things just started to taper off. He just wasn't looking good at all. So they have a very strong plan B plan there with Mac Jones. Cam Newton went 8 for 9 for 103 yards and 1 total touchdowns. Mr. Mac Jones went 13 of 19 for 146 yards. Now, obviously, if Cam Newton is going to be the starter of this team, which he will be, the team is going to run differently. They're going to try to run the ball more when Mac Jones is under center. I expect them to try to be a little bit more aggressive in the passing game. But again, Cam Newton hasn't really done anything that would point to the fact that Mac Jones would be the starter. He hasn't played like shit. He has played very, very solid. So my belief, just like it's been all offseason, is that Cam Newton will be the guy. And eventually, if things start to really go downhill, that I believe Mac Jones becomes the starter of the New England Patriots. Next up, we got some more quarterback talk. A big winner of preseason week number 2 was Zach Wilson. This man absolutely tore into the Green Bay Packers defense, going 9 of 11 for 128 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and stand here and tell you that Zach Wilson has top 12 upside this season, because frankly, I just do not see that out of the Jets and out of Zach Wilson. But I do believe now that the Jets are in good hands, and if you were looking to draft one of these wide receivers, we're going to talk about a wide receiver on the team in a second. If you were to look to draft one of these wide receivers, then you should feel a whole lot more confident in drafting those wide receivers after this performance up against the Green Bay Packers. Zach Wilson looks something like, not like Sam Darnold. He looks like a legitimate quarterback. Now, again, I'm not going to go ahead here and stomp on the grave of Sam Darnold, but I believe that this may actually have been the correct decision for the Jets to have drafted Zach Wilson. I think he's going to look pretty solid this year. Again, not a guy I see really finishing inside of the top 12, but wouldn't be surprised if he was a middling quarterback too this season and looked very, very solid for what should be a Jets team that is looking towards being really actually pretty freaking solid in the future. Next up, we have Corey Davis, the wide receiver of the New York Football Jets. Zach Wilson was feeding Corey Davis in this game. 4 receptions on 6 targets for 70 yards. While a lot of people are talking up Elijah Moore, and reasonably so, right? Elijah Moore, from all reports out of camp, is looking like the best wide receiver on this team, but this goes to show that maybe Corey Davis being drafted ahead of him is actually the correct decision. I think there's a pretty solid chance that either Corey Davis or Elijah Moore is the #1 wide receiver in targets on this New York Football Jets team, and if you're able to find the #1 guy in targets on a given team as late in the draft as a guy like Corey Davis or Elijah Moore go, I'm definitely willing to pay that price. But it seems to be, at least right now, that Corey Davis is going to be the leading receiver of the New York Football Jets. And inside of like the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th round, where you can get Corey Davis right now, he appears to be a steal in drafts. Continuing with the New York Football Jets, Michael Carter, to me, looked really, really good in this game, but it appears that he is definitely not going to be the starter of this team. It appears that they're going to go with a committee approach and give the nod to Ty Johnson and Tevin Coleman earlier on in the season. Now, does this mean that you should go ahead and just completely fade Michael Carter? To me, no. Because if I'm being honest with you guys, I have seen this coming the whole time. Michael Carter tears up in training camp. He looks like the best running back, but that's just not how the team is going to let it work. They're going to make Michael Carter fight for it, and eventually he is going to become the #1 running back on this Jets roster, and he's going to be really good for fantasy. The question is it too much of a risk where he is going right now to take a running back that is going to potentially not be the starter for maybe half the season, or maybe he doesn't become the starter at all? But obviously that is not going to be my assumption, because I believe talent wins out in the NFL. The cream always rises to the top, and Michael Carter will eventually become the starting running back of this team. He had 10 carries for 52 yards, 1 reception on 1 target for -1 yard. So he had a very, very solid game, but the other running backs were getting the nod ahead of him when the first team offense was out there. So I'm still in on Michael Carter, where he's going at his current average draft position. I think that a lot of people are going to continue to worry, continue to panic based upon 2 preseason games, but a couple of weeks into the season, everyone who was screaming to the mountaintops that Michael Carter was not going to be able to pass up the likes of Tevin Coleman, the likes of Ty Johnson, are going to feel really fucking stupid, because to be honest with you, those guys are career backups. Michael Carter is going to be the guy eventually. Next up, we have a wide receiver that I am still not super confident in, but for all the truthers of this player, for all the people that were riding high on this player, this seems to have kind of given you some confirmation bias. Mecole Hardman legitimately looked like the clear wide receiver #2 on this team, having 4 receptions on 8 targets for 39 yards and 1 touchdown. He looked very, very involved in this offense in this game. But I'm still going to continue to assert that I am not 100% confident that Mecole Hardman is the guy. I am just not that confident that he is the clear #2 there. I think there's a solid chance that Byron Pringle ends up with more targets than him, that Demarcus Robinson ends up with more targets than him. Obviously, the best bet to be the number 2 wide receiver on the team right now would be Mecole Hardman. So if he falls far enough in drafts, I am definitely fine selecting him, but I'm still not necessarily on the Mecole Hardman train like I've seen a lot of people be at this point in the offseason. But before we get into the next winner from week number 2, I'd like to let you guys know that today's show is being brought to you guys by our brand new podcast, Betting You. Who will win the Heisman? Can Georgia dethrone Alabama? Which MAC team should you be putting your money on? These questions and more are answered every single Wednesday with Myles Gaskin and Ben Rasa as they talk all things college football betting. We have episodes available now on every single podcast platform, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So go ahead and check them out today. Again, the podcast is called Betting You. So back into it. The next player that I believe to be a winner from week number 2 of preseason is Justin Fields. Now, Justin Fields' numbers, obviously right here that I'm about to read off, they don't look amazing, right? 9 for 19 and 80 passing yards, 4 carries for 46 rushing yards, very good, but 9 for 19 obviously is not the best. But I do not know how Matt Nagy goes into the locker room after the game and asserts that Andy Dalton is going to be the starter week number 1. Now, do I believe Andy Dalton will be the starter week number 1? 100% do I believe that. But I do believe that Justin Fields has shown off some solid talent week 1, week 2 of the preseason. I'm looking for him to expand on that in week number 3, and maybe he will be named the starter week number 1. My thoughts, though, honestly, is that Andy Dalton is going to be the sacrificial lamb week number 1, get absolutely put on a stretcher by Aaron Donald, metaphorically, not actually get fucking hurt or something. I'm talking about just get destroyed in that game, get hit left and right, and then they let Justin Fields go out there week number 2. I honestly don't know how. Like I said, Matt Nagy looks at the team after these performances and says, you know what? Andy Dalton looks like the best quarterback here. He needs to be the starter. This is the best way for Matt Nagy to completely lose the locker room, is by continuing to roll out Andy Dalton. I think Dalton will be the guy week 1, but relatively soon, Justin Fields, who has looked pretty solid in these preseason games, will eventually become the starter. Next up, we got Horsecock, Drew Lock, and Teddy Bridgewater, aka Teddy Roosevelt, both impressing. They both look very, very good in their matchup this weekend. Drew Lock going 9 of 14 and 80 passing yards. Teddy Bridgewater going 9 for 11 for 105 yards and 1 total touchdown. So both quarterbacks look pretty solid in that performance. My kind of thought process on this is that Drew Lock is going to be the starting quarterback, and they have kind of a plan B fail-safe option if things go wrong with Drew Lock. If Drew Lock starts to have those down games, to me, Drew Lock is a very momentum-based quarterback. If you guys have noticed his games in the past, when he starts rolling early on in the game, there is no stopping the guy. But if he starts off cold, if he's looking bad the first couple of drives of the game, then things go completely south for Drew Lock, and he ends up looking terrible in those games. So I think that if Drew Lock ends up actually staying consistent early on in the season, he will potentially be the starter for the whole year. But obviously, Teddy Bridgewater is a good enough quarterback to become eventually the guy there in Denver. My main takeaway, though, is that based upon the first 2 preseason games that we have seen out of Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater, I think Drew Lock potentially gives them the best chance to win. So I think he will be named the starter going into the season. But before we get on into the final week 2 preseason winner, I would like to let you guys know that our Awesemo fantasy football draft kit is now available for season-long and best ball fantasy leagues. The same projections, tools, and analysis that we use for NFL DFS goes into this package, which includes our draft wingman, best ball rankings and stacking guide, trade value chart, and so much more. You'll be receiving up to $35 credit for Underdog and FFPC leagues. You can get this package for 33% off when you use promo code WINYOURLEAGUE at checkout. That's less than $10 for everything we have to offer for season long as well as best ball. Just click the link in the description and activate the offer. Make sure you guys go ahead and check that out. So final winner of the preseason week number 2. This guy didn't even play in week number 2, but I believe that the fact that he didn't play is enough for me to believe that Darrell Henderson being held out for the LA Rams really cements him as being the guy, and they're just looking for that number 2 back, the number 3 back. Jake Funk goes 7 for 56. Xavier Jones 7 for 29. I was previously thinking that Jake Funk would be the 3rd string guy and Xavier Jones would get the nod as the number 2 running back. Maybe Xavier Jones gets passed up by Jake Funk. Obviously, not super important who the fuck the running back 2 is for the Rams, but it is important that Darrell Henderson has been held out of these games, right? He's been held out of these games, which is very, very good to pointing towards the fact that this is going to be a potential workhorse running back in LA with the Rams. So thank you guys all so much for watching this video. If you did end up enjoying, please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, we put out content every single day on here to help you guys win your 2021 Fantasy Football Championship. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Again, make sure to follow me on Twitter at NotoriousFNTSY. I love you guys all. Stay safe as always. Goodbye.